The air in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Davenport and Sons was thick with the scent of old money and fresh grief. But for Clarice Davenport it was heavy with something far more suffocating contempt. Seated across the gleaming table, her husband Jacques whispered audibly to his mistress Brianna, a woman draped in diamonds that should have been Clarice's. A cruel smirk played on his lips as he gestured toward his wife. "Just look at her," he sneered, playing the part of the grieving widow. "It's almost convincing." Little did he know the performance was about to end and Clarice was holding a script no one else had ever seen. The will they were about to read was a lie, and the truth she held would not just change her future, it would shatter theirs. The boardroom on the 50th floor of the Davenport Tower was a monument to power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Boston's sprawling cityscape, a kingdom built by one man, Robert Montrose. Robert the patriarch, the titan of industry, was gone. He had passed away a week prior, and his absence was a physical void in the room, a vacuum of authority that his son Jacques was all too eager to fill. Clarice sat at one end of the long, polished table. She was a study in quiet elegance and deep sorrow, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored black dress. Her posture was straight, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed on the grain of the wood before her. She had been married to Jacques for 15 years, a union that had begun with hope and devolved into a cold, gilded cage. Across from her, Jacques was practically vibrating with anticipation. He wasn't even attempting to feign grief. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than the car Clarice drove, a smug grin plastered on his handsome yet increasingly dissipated face. Beside him, clinging to his arm like a designer accessory, was Brianna. She was everything Clarice was not: loud, ostentatious, and dripping with a garish display of wealth. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her lips plumped, and her dress was a shade of crimson that was an open insult in a room of mourning. She shot Clarice a look of pure, triumphant pity. Also present were Jacques' mother, Genevieve Davenport, a woman whose face was a tight mask of disapproval for everyone but her perfect son, and the family lawyers Mr. Coleman for Jacques and a junior partner named Mr. Davies, assigned to Clarice out of a perfunctory sense of propriety. The executor of the will, a stern old-school lawyer named Franklin Pike, sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable as he adjusted his spectacles. "If we are all present, Mr. Pike," began, his voice dry as old parchment, "we may proceed with the reading of the last will and testament of Robert Gregory Montrose." Jacques leaned back, draping his arm over the back of Brianna's chair. "Let's get on with it, Franklin. Some of us have plans." He winked at Brianna, who giggled a shrill sound that echoed unnaturally in the somber room. Clarice flinched but didn't look up. She had endured a decade of this kind of humiliation. Jacques' affairs were not secrets. They were weapons he used to wound her. Brianna was simply the latest and most permanent fixture. He had moved her into a penthouse in a building owned by the Davenport Corporation, paid for with company funds, and flaunted her at galas and charity events, forcing Clarice to watch from the sidelines with a forced smile. Mr. Pike cleared his throat, a sound of profound disapproval, and began to read. The will was straightforward, exactly as everyone expected. It was a document drafted 10 years ago. It detailed bequests to various charities, loyal employees, and a generous trust for his wife Genevieve. Then came the main clause. "And the remainder of my estate, including my entire controlling interest in Davenport and Sons, all real estate holdings, stock portfolios, and personal effects, I leave to my only son, Jacques Michael Montrose." A collective sigh of relief came from Jacques' side of the table. He squeezed Brianna's shoulder, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He looked directly at Clarice, his eyes filled with malicious glee. "Well, that settles that," he said, his voice booming with newfound power. He turned to Brianna. "Did you hear that, baby? Everything, just as I told you." Brianna preened. "Of course, darling. You deserve it. You're the one who's going to lead this company into the future, not some relic." Her eyes flickered towards Clarice. Genevieve dabbed a perfectly dry eye with a lace handkerchief. "My boy," she whispered, "your father knew you were the only one capable." Jacques stood up, unable to contain his arrogance. He walked around the table and stopped behind Clarice's chair, placing his hands on its back. He leaned down, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. "And to you, Clarice," he hissed, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey. "There's a small provision, the house in Brookline and a modest stipend, enough to keep you from being a complete embarrassment. Consider it a severance package for 15 years of service." He chuckled, a low guttural sound. "I'll have my lawyer send you the divorce papers next week. You'll be out of the house by the end of the month. Don't worry," he added, gesturing to Brianna. "We'll make sure to redecorate. The place needs a woman's touch, a real woman's touch." Brianna giggled again. "I was thinking gold leaf for the dining room, Johnny." Clarice's shoulders trembled slightly, the only outward sign of the storm raging within her. She had known this was coming. She had prepared for it. But the sheer cruelty of it, the open mockery in this sacred space, still cut deep. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about erasure. They wanted to wipe away her 15 years as a Davenport, to render her invisible. Mr. Pike looked on, his expression hardening. Mr. Coleman, Jacques' lawyer, was already packing his briefcase, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. Mr. Davies, Clarice's young lawyer, looked pale and defeated, shuffling his papers and avoiding her gaze. He had told her it was a hopeless case. The will was ironclad. Jacques straightened up, clapping his hands together. "All right, Franklin, thank you for your services. We'll be in touch. Now, if you'll excuse us, Brianna and I have a reservation at L'Espalier to celebrate my new responsibilities." He was about to walk away, to leave her there in the ruins of her life. The humiliation was complete. The vultures had picked the bones clean. Clarice took a slow, deliberate breath. She could feel Robert's presence in the room, not as a ghost, but as a source of strength. She remembered his words to her, spoken in confidence just 6 months ago in his study, his voice weak but his eyes sharp and clear. "Patience, Clarice. The loudest man in the room is often the weakest. Let him shout. Your moment will come." Her moment was now. She lifted her head, and for the first time that day, she looked directly at Jacques. Her eyes, which had been downcast and clouded with sorrow, were now as clear and hard as diamonds. She spoke, her voice not loud but carrying a weight that made everyone freeze. "Mr. Pike," she said, her tone steady and resolute, "before we conclude, I believe you have one more document to read. 15 years earlier, Clarice wasn't a Montrose. She was Clarice Hayes, an art history graduate with a mountain of student debt, working as a junior curator at a small Boston gallery. That's where she met Jacques. He was charming then, a whirlwind of confidence and wealth. He pursued her relentlessly, showering her with gifts and promises of a life she could only dream of. She fell in love not with the money, but with the man she thought he was, or the man she believed he could be. Their wedding was a society event, but from the beginning Clarice felt like an outsider. Genevieve Davenport made it clear that Clarice's middle-class background was a stain on the family's pristine lineage. Jacques, once free from the thrill of the chase, quickly grew bored. His charm curdled into condescension, his confidence into arrogance. Clarice became less of a wife and more of a fixture, a necessary but unexciting part of the Davenport aesthetic. Her only true ally in that cold, sprawling mansion was Robert Montrose. In the beginning, Robert was intimidating. A self-made man who had turned his father's small construction firm into a global real estate empire, he was stern, demanding, and spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. He observed Clarice with a hawk's eye, expecting her to be another one of Jacques' frivolous dalliances. But Clarice was different. She was quiet, but she was not passive. She was intelligent and possessed a deep, unshakable integrity that the Davenport family seemed to lack. Robert started to notice. He saw her poring over the financial pages, asking intelligent questions about market trends. He saw her managing the household with a quiet efficiency that his own wife Genevieve had always outsourced. He saw the way she treated the household staff with kindness and respect, learning their names and the names of their children. Their connection began in the library. It was Robert's sanctuary, A room filled with first editions and leather-bound classics. Clarice, an avid reader, would spend her evenings there, losing herself in worlds far from her own. One night, Robert found her reading a biography of Andrew Carnegie. A ruthless man, Robert had grunted, startling her, but he built things that lasted. He also believed that the man who dies rich dies disgraced. Clarice replied softly, not looking up from her book. He understood that wealth was a responsibility, not a prize. Robert paused, studying her. It was the first time anyone in the family had challenged his perspective rather than simply agreeing with it. He pulled up a chair. For the next 2 hours, they didn't speak of family or society gossip. They talked about business ethics, legacy, and the meaning of a life well lived. It was the first of many such conversations. Over the years, Robert began to confide in her his disappointment in Jacques, a constant, bitter undercurrent. He saw his son's profligate spending, his lack of discipline, his fundamental disrespect for the empire Robert had spent a lifetime building. He sees the company as his personal bank, Robert told Clarice one evening, swirling a glass of scotch. He closes deals based on ego, not on sound financial strategy. He surrounds himself with sycophants. He has my name, but he does not have my character. As Robert's health began to fail, his reliance on Clarice grew. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, struggled with the buttons on his shirt. Clarice would help him without a word, preserving his dignity. His eyesight weakened. She would read him the Wall Street Journal every morning. She became his confidant, his assistant, and in a way the child he had always wished for. Jacques, meanwhile, grew more resentful. He saw their bond as a threat. "What are you plotting with the old man?" he would sneer. "Trying to secure your spot." "Don't bother. The name Davenport is all that matters, and you'll never truly have it." His cruelty escalated. He began the affair with Brianna, not even bothering to hide it. It was a calculated move to humiliate Clarice, to prove to her and to his father that she was disposable. But Robert saw it for what it was, a desperate act of a weak man, terrified of being exposed. About 6 months before he passed, Robert called Clarice into his study. He looked frail, the formidable energy that once filled every room now dimmed to a flicker. "Clarice," he began, his voice raspy, "I'm not a fool. I know what Jacques is, and I know what he will do when I am gone." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." She sat, her heart heavy with a mixture of grief for the man he was becoming and fear for the future. "The official will," he continued, "the one Franklin Pike has in his safe, leaves everything to Jacques. It has to. To do otherwise would cause a scandal, a shareholder panic. It would be an admission of my own failure as a father." Clarice's heart sank. She had held on to a sliver of hope that Robert would protect her. "But," Robert said, and a spark of the old fire returned to his eyes, "a man is allowed to change his mind. A man is allowed to reward loyalty and punish betrayal." He slid a thick sealed envelope across the desk. It was heavy, made of expensive vellum. "This," he said, "is my true will. I wrote it myself. My personal physician and my oldest friend, Judge Miller, witnessed it last week. It is a holographic will entirely in my own hand. Legally, it supersedes any previous testament." Clarice stared at the envelope, her hand trembling as she reached for it. "Do not open it," he commanded gently. "Keep it hidden. Keep it safe. When the time comes at the reading, let Jacques have his moment of triumph. Let him expose his true character to the world. Let him believe he has won." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "This document contains conditions. It is not a simple inheritance. It is a test. A test for him and a burden for you. You will have to be strong, Clarice. Stronger than you have ever been." He then explained what she would need to do, the evidence she would need to gather. He told her about Peter Gable, the company's chief financial officer for 30 years, a man fiercely loyal to Robert and disgusted by Jacques' recklessness. "Peter knows where the bodies are buried," Robert had said grimly. "He will help you." For the next 6 months, Clarice lived a double life. By day, she was the dutiful, long-suffering wife and daughter-in-law. By night, she met secretly with Peter Gable. The quiet, observant woman Jacques and Genevieve dismissed as a decorative piece of furniture was meticulously building a case against her own husband. Peter, following Robert's final instructions, provided her with copies of documents, inflated expense reports, secret wire transfers to offshore accounts under Brianna's name, damning emails outlining Jacques' plan to sell off a profitable division of the company to a competitor for a massive personal kickback. She chronicled every public humiliation, every flaunted infidelity, not as a scorned wife, but as a prosecutor building a case. She was no longer just a victim. She was the architect of a plan set in motion by the only man who had ever truly seen her worth. She was honoring Robert's final wish to protect his legacy from the one person who was supposed to carry it on. Now sitting in that boardroom with Jacques' mocking laughter still echoing in her ears, she clutched her handbag. Inside, nestled in a silk pouch, was the vellum envelope. Robert's final devastating move. A profound silence descended upon the boardroom. Jacques, who had been halfway to the door, turned slowly, a look of disbelief on his face. Brianna's vapid smile faltered. Genevieve stared at Clarice as if she had suddenly grown a second head. "What did you say?" Jacques demanded, his voice dangerously low. Clarice met his gaze without flinching. "I said, Mr. Pike, that there is another document, a more recent one." Mr. Pike, the executor, who had looked as defeated as everyone else, now sat bolt upright. A flicker of something intrigue, perhaps even hope, crossed his stoic features. "Another document? What are you referring to, Mrs. Davenport?" Jacques' lawyer. Mr. Coleman stepped forward, his expression one of pure contempt. "This is absurd. The will has been read. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized. My client is the sole heir. This is nothing more than a desperate last-minute ploy by a woman who is about to be cut off." "Is that what you think this is, Mr. Coleman?" Clarice asked, her voice calm and measured. "A ploy." She reached into her handbag and withdrew the heavy vellum envelope. She placed it on the polished table with a soft but definitive thud. The thick, creamy paper seemed to absorb the light in the room, drawing every eye to it. Robert Davenport's bold, black-inked signature was scrawled across the seal. Jacques stared at the envelope, his face paling. He recognized his father's handwriting. "What is that? Where did you get that?" "He gave it to me," Clarice said simply. 6 months ago." Mr. Pike reached for the envelope, his movements slow and deliberate. "May I?" Clarice nodded. Mr. Pike took the envelope, holding it as if it were a sacred artifact. He examined the seal, the handwriting, the weight of the paper. He ran a thumb over the signatures of the witnesses on the back. A low whistle escaped his lips. "The witnesses are Dr. Alan Peterson and retired federal judge Lawrence Miller," he announced to the room. "Both men of unimpeachable character, and this is without a doubt Robert Davenport's signature." Mr. Coleman scoffed. "It's a forgery. It has to be. She's been plotting this." "Then I invite you to call Judge Miller," Clarice said coolly. "He is waiting for your call. He was one of your father's oldest friends, Jacques. Or had you forgotten?" Jacques' bravado began to crack. He remembered his father's frequent lunches with the old judge, lunches he had always been too busy to attend. With trembling hands, Mr. Pike took a letter opener from his briefcase and carefully slit the seal. He withdrew several pages of thick handwritten legal paper. The room was so quiet that the rustle of the paper sounded like a thunderclap. Mr. Pike began to read, his eyes widening with every line. He paused, looked up at the stunned faces around the table, and then continued, his voice now filled with a gravity that had been absent before. "This document, dated February 14th of this year, is titled, 'The Last Will and Final Testament of Robert Gregory Montrose.' It begins, 'This document, being of sound mind and body, hereby revokes all previous wills and codicils made by me.'" A gasp escaped Genevieve's lips. Jacques took a step forward, his fists clenched. "No, that's not possible. He wouldn't." "It appears he did." Mr. Pike said, not looking up. He continued to read the preamble, which detailed Robert's love for his company and his desire to see its legacy preserved for generations. Then he came to the operative clauses. To my wife, Genevieve Davenport, I leave the marital home in Palm Beach and a lifetime annuity sufficient to maintain her comfort under the stewardship of a trustee. I do this with a heavy heart, knowing that her blindness to our son's flaws has made her complicit in the potential destruction of our family's name. Genevieve looked as if she had been slapped. Complicit, how dare he? Mr. Pike ignored her, his gaze fixed on the page. His voice dropped as he read the next part. To my son Jacques Michael Montrose. The room held its breath. Jacques leaned forward, a desperate hope in his eyes. I leave the sum of $1 to be paid from petty cash. I also leave him this advice. A man's worth is not measured by what he inherits, but by what he builds. You, my son, have only ever known how to tear things down. It is my deepest regret that I failed to teach you the difference. The words hung in the air, a final, devastating judgment from beyond the grave. Jacques stumbled back as if struck. $1, $1. This is insane. He was senile. She manipulated him. Brianna, for her part, was already starting to subtly distance herself from Jacques, her expression shifting from smugness to alarm. The diamond bracelet on her wrist suddenly seemed less like a trophy and more like a liability. There is more, Mr. Pike said, his voice firm. He looked directly at Clarice, a newfound respect in his eyes. The will continues. All the remainder of my estate, including my entire 51% controlling interest in Davenport & Sons, all real estate holdings, my complete stock and bond portfolio, art collections, and all personal effects I bequeath under the following conditions. Everyone leaned in. A conditional will. This was where the true battle would be fought. Clarissa's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment Robert had prepared her for. The humiliation was over. The fight was about to begin. Mr. Coleman, Jacques' lawyer, finally found his voice. He slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed with anger. This is an outrage. This document is a clear product of undue influence. Look at her, he spat, pointing a trembling finger at Clarice. She preyed on a sick old man, filling his head with lies and turning him against his own son. Your accusations are noted, Mr. Coleman. Mr. Pike said, his tone icy. However, this will is holographic witnessed and contains a clause which I am about to read specifically addressing the matter of it being contested. He cleared his throat and continued reading from Robert's will. Should any party named herein contest the validity of this testament in a court of law, they shall forfeit any and all bequests, no matter how small, and be treated as if they had predeceased me. Coleman froze, his mouth hanging open. The no contest clause was a classic ironclad move. Jacques was trapped. If he sued and lost, he wouldn't even get his single insulting dollar. Now, Mr. Pike said, as to the conditions of the primary bequest. He adjusted his glasses and read from the document, his voice ringing with the authority of the words themselves. My entire estate is to be placed in a temporary trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust and the ultimate inheritor of my legacy shall be my daughter-in-law, Clarice Hayes Montrose. Brianna let out a choke sound, a cross between a sob and a laugh of disbelief. Jacques looked like he was going to be physically ill. If, Mr. Pike continued, emphasizing the word, she can provide this body at the time of this reading with irrefutable proof of two conditions being met regarding my son Jacques. The air grew thick with tension. This wasn't a simple transfer of wealth. It was a trial, and Clarice was the prosecutor, judge, and jury all rolled into one. Condition the first, Mr. Pike read, proof of profound moral turpitude, not mere infidelity, which is a common and mundane sin, but a pattern of behavior that has brought public shame and disgrace upon the Davenport name, demonstrating a character unfit to steward a public-facing corporation. Jacques let out a sharp, relieved laugh. Moral turpitude. That's subjective. That's meaningless. A few pictures in the tabloids. That's just society gossip. No court would uphold that. Mr. Coleman nodded vigorously. He's right. The clause is unenforceably vague. It's an emotional statement, not a legal directive. Clarice remained silent, her expression unreadable. Condition the second. Mr. Pike went on, his voice overriding the protests. Irrefutable proof of gross fiscal malfeasance and a deliberate attempt to undermine the financial integrity of Davenport and Sons. This must include evidence of embezzlement, conspiracy to defraud, or actions taken for personal enrichment at the direct and significant expense of the company and its shareholders. Jacques' laughter died in his throat. His face went ashen. He shot a panicked look at his lawyer. This was different. This wasn't subjective. This was criminal. If, Mr. Pike concluded, Clarice Davenport can satisfy these two conditions to the executor's satisfaction today, the trust is immediately dissolved and the entirety of the estate passes to her free and clear. If she cannot, the estate passes to its default beneficiary, a consortium of charitable foundations dedicated to preserving architectural history. The room was stunned. Robert had created a masterpiece of posthumous strategy. He had not simply disinherited his son. He had forced a public accounting of his sins. He had weaponized his will, turning it into a tool of justice. And he had placed the trigger in Clarice's hands. Jacques turned on Clarice, his face a mask of pure fury. You did this. You twisted him. You have nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing, Mr. Davies. Clarissa's young lawyer, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally leaned over and whispered to her, Mrs. Davenport, these are incredibly high bars of proof. Irrefutable is a powerful word. Do you actually have anything? Clarisse gave him a small, reassuring smile. She then turned her attention back to the head of the table. Mr. Pike, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. I am prepared to offer such proof now. She reached into her handbag again, but this time she didn't pull out an envelope. She pulled out a sleek silver flash drive, which she placed carefully on the table. Beside it, she placed a thick leather-bound folder. Everything you need is in here, she stated. The evidence for both conditions. Shall we begin with the moral turpitude? Jacques sank into his chair, a cold dread washing over him. He had always seen Clarice as a fragile porcelain doll, something to be displayed and eventually discarded. He had never once imagined that beneath the delicate exterior was a core of pure steel. He had mocked her, belittled her, and humiliated her for years, all while she was quietly, patiently gathering the stones for his grave. This is a farce, Mr. Coleman blustered, trying to regain control. We are not a courtroom. You cannot simply present evidence without due process. Robert's will states the proof must be to the executor's satisfaction. Mr. Pike retorted, his authority absolute. I am the executor. The will gives me this discretion. I will see the evidence. Proceed, Mrs. Montrose. Clarice nodded and opened the leather-bound folder. Regarding the first condition, profound moral turpitude bringing shame upon the Davenport name. Jacques smirked, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. Oh, this should be good. Are you going to show everyone my vacation photos with Brianna? It's hardly a state secret. No, Jacques. I'm not interested in your sordid vacations. Clarice replied, her voice cold. I'm interested in how you paid for them. She slid a sheaf of papers across the table to Mr. Pike. These are credit card statements for a corporate Amex card issued to Jacques. A card meant for business expenses. As you can see, there are charges over the last 2 years totaling over $2 million. Charges for jewelry from Tiffany's and Graff, coincidentally the same pieces Miss Cole is wearing today. Brianna instinctively covered the diamond necklace at her throat. There are also charges for private jet charters to St. Bart's, month-long suite rentals at the Hotel de Paris in Monaco, and a lease on a Ferrari in Brianna's name. More damningly, Clarice continued, are the payments to a reputation management firm, a firm known for suppressing negative stories in the press, specifically stories about a drunk driving incident in the Hamptons that was covered up and a settlement paid to a young intern at this very company for workplace harassment. Jacques leaped to his feet. Those are lies. Sealed settlements. You can't talk about that. I'm not talking about it, Jacques. I'm providing documentation, Clarice said calmly. She pushed another document towards Mr. Pike. This is a sworn affidavit from the intern's lawyer confirming the settlement was paid from a slush fund connected to the company's marketing department. Your father, Mr. Pike, stipulated that bringing public shame upon the family name was the benchmark. I ask you, does using corporate funds to cover up sexual harassment and drunk driving meet that criteria? Mr. Pike scanned the documents, his face a grim mask. He looked at Jacques with utter disgust. It would appear so. Genevieve let out a small wounded cry. Jacques, is this true? She's twisting things. He snarled, but the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. Clarice wasn't finished. And then there is the matter of the Davenport Family Foundation for Underprivileged Youth, a charity Robert poured his heart and soul into. She slid another file across the table. These are bank records showing that for the past 18 months, Jacques, as acting director, has been diverting funds from the charity. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. A total of $850,000 was funneled into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The name of that corporation, Breezy Holdings, LLC. She paused, letting the name hang in the air, then looked pointedly at Brianna. I can only assume that's short for Brianna. Brianna's face went white. She looked at Jacques, her eyes wide with terror. This went far beyond being a mistress. This was criminal fraud. Mr. Pike looked down at the evidence, his hands shaking slightly with rage. Embezzling from a children's charity. Robert would... He couldn't finish the sentence. He simply shook his head. The first condition has been met. Comprehensively. Jacques stared at Clarice, his eyes burning with a new kind of hatred, the hatred born of fear. You were spying on me. I was honoring your father's final wishes, she corrected him. He asked me to protect his legacy. And that brings me to the second condition, gross fiscal malfeasance against Davenport & Sons. She turned her attention to the silver flash drive. Mr. Pike, your laptop has a USB port, I presume. Moments later, the flash drive was plugged in, its contents projected onto a large screen on the boardroom wall that was normally used for shareholder presentations. The screen filled with spreadsheets, email chains, and scanned documents. This, Clarice announced, her voice echoing in the silent room, is a record of Jacques' attempt to systematically devalue and sell off the most profitable subsidiary of this company, Davenport Logistics, to our biggest competitor, Westbridge Holdings. Mr. Coleman lunged forward. Objection. That's confidential corporate strategy. It's corporate sabotage, Clarice countered. For the last year, Jacques has been in secret communication with the CEO of Westbridge. Here are the emails. On the screen, a thread of emails appeared. In them, Jacques clearly outlined strategies to miss shipping targets, create artificial supply chain delays, and fudge quarterly reports for the logistics division. The goal was to drive down its stock value so Westbridge could acquire it for a fraction of its true worth. And why would he do this? Clarice asked rhetorically. She clicked to another file. A scanned copy of a secret agreement appeared. Because Westbridge promised him a personal payout of $50 million and a seat on their board once the acquisition was complete, he was selling his father's company out from under him. The final piece of evidence was the most damning. It was a recorded phone call. Your father knew something was wrong, Clarice explained, looking at Jacques. He felt the company shifting beneath him. He asked Peter Gable, the CFO, to put a recorder on the main office line. He suspected you, but he needed proof. She pressed play. Jacques' voice filled the room, slick and confident, talking to the CEO of Westbridge. The old man is fading fast, Jacques' voice said from the speakers. Once he's gone, I'll have total control. We can push the sale through in a month. No one will be the wiser. Clarice, please. That woman can barely balance a checkbook. She won't have a clue. The recording ended. The avalanche of evidence was complete. It was irrefutable. It was catastrophic. Jacques had not just been a bad son or an unfaithful husband. He was a criminal. He had tried to destroy the very legacy he felt so entitled to. Mr. Pike removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking weary and profoundly sad. "There is no need to see anything further. Both conditions of the will have been satisfied beyond any shadow of a doubt." He turned to face the room, his gaze settling on Clarice. He stood up, a formal gesture of respect. "In my capacity as executor of the estate of Robert Davenport, and according to the explicit terms of his final legally binding will, I hereby declare that the temporary trust is dissolved. The entire estate, including controlling interest of Davenport and Sons, passes immediately and entirely to Mrs. Clarisse Montrose." For a moment the world seemed to stop. The only sound was the faint hum of the city traffic 50 floors below. Clarisse felt a wave of dizziness, a mixture of profound relief, vindication, and the heavy, sobering weight of her new reality. She had won. Robert's legacy was safe. Then the silence shattered. "No!" The roar came from Jacques, a raw, primal scream of fury and disbelief. He lunged across the table, his face contorted into a mask of rage, his target not the flash drive or the documents, but Clarisse herself. "You witch, you planned this, you'll pay for this." Before he could get close, Mr. Davies and the building's security chief, who had been standing discreetly by the door, intercepted him, grabbing his arms. He thrashed like a caged animal, his expensive suit tearing at the seams. "It's all lies, forgeries. She can't do this," he screamed, his eyes wild. Mr. Coleman, his face the color of ash, tried to intervene. "Jacques, calm down. We'll fight this. We'll appeal." "On what grounds, Mr. Coleman?" Mr. Pike's voice cut through the noise like a shard of ice. "That your client is a philandering embezzler who committed corporate espionage. The evidence is not just compelling, it is prosecutable. I would advise you to worry less about an appeal and more about the SEC and the district attorney. I am legally obligated to turn this information over to the authorities." The mention of the DA sent a fresh jolt of terror through the room. This wasn't just about losing an inheritance anymore. This was about losing freedom. Brianna, who had been frozen in her chair, finally snapped into action. She wasn't screaming or crying. Her survival instincts kicked in. She slowly, deliberately began to unclasp the diamond bracelet from her wrist, placing it on the table as if it were contaminated. She slid the ruby ring from her finger. She looked at Jacques, who was still struggling against the guards, and her expression was not one of love or support, but of cold reptilian calculation. "Johnny," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "You told me this was all above board. You told me the money was from a private investment fund." "Shut up, Brianna," Jacques snarled. "No," she said, standing up and backing away from the table. "I had nothing to do with this. The Shell Corporation, the charity, that was all him. I am a victim here too." She looked at Mr. Pike, her eyes pleading. "I will cooperate fully with the authorities." With that, she turned and fled the room, leaving her former lover to his fate. The click of her heels fading down the hallway was the sound of the final nail being hammered into Jacques' coffin. The most dramatic collapse, however, came from Genevieve. She had sat through the revelations in a state of catatonic shock, her mind refusing to process the destruction of the perfect son she had created in her imagination. But seeing Jacques restrained like a common criminal, hearing the threat of prison, and watching Brianna abandon him, finally broke through her denial. A low, guttural wail escaped her lips. She swayed in her chair, her hand clutching at her chest. "My son! My boy! Robert, what have you done?" she whispered before her eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped sideways in a dead faint. The room descended into utter chaos. The security guards were dragging a screaming, cursing Jacques towards the door. Mr. Davies was rushing to Genevieve's side, fumbling for his phone to call for a paramedic. Mr. Coleman was frantically trying to talk to his client, who was now beyond reason. And in the eye of this hurricane, Clarice sat perfectly still. She watched it all unfold, not with triumph, but with a deep, aching sadness. This was the family she had married into. This was the legacy of lies and greed that Robert had fought to contain. She felt no joy in their destruction, only the grim satisfaction of a necessary, painful surgery. She had cut out the cancer to save the patient, Mr. Pike walked over to her side, his expression one of weary admiration. "Mrs. Davenport," he said, his voice low and respectful. "I have never, in 50 years of practicing law, witnessed anything quite like this. Your father-in-law was a brilliant man. He chose his successor well." Clarice finally looked up at him, the strength that had held her together for months beginning to waver. Her eyes welled with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow for the family that had just imploded. They were tears of gratitude for the one man who had believed in her. "He was," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He truly was." The door to the boardroom closed, shutting out Jacques's fading screams. The sirens grew louder in the distance, a fitting soundtrack to the end of an era. The Davenport Empire as the world knew it was shattered, and from the ashes, a new one was about to be born. The sirens faded into the city's symphony, leaving behind a silence in the boardroom that was louder than Jacques's screams had been. For a long time, Clarice remained seated, the leather-bound folder and silver flash drive resting before her, like relics from a war she hadn't known she was fighting until the final battle. The adrenaline that had sharpened her senses and steadied her voice began to recede, and in its place a profound exhaustion settled deep into her bones. Mr. Pike had quietly excused himself to begin the formal process of transferring control, leaving Clarice alone with her young lawyer, Mr. Davies, who simply stared at her with a look of unadulterated awe. That night she didn't return to the grand Brookline house she had once shared with Jacques. That place was a museum of misery, each room echoing with a different humiliation. Instead, she had her driver take her to Robert's long unoccupied penthouse apartment atop the Davenport Tower. It was a quiet, masculine space, smelling of old books, cedar, and faint lingering cigar smoke. It felt more like home than any place she had lived in for 15 years. She stood before the vast window, the city lights twinkling below like a scattered handful of diamonds, and for the first time she truly understood what she was looking at. It wasn't just a view, it was a responsibility. It was hers. The following days were a whirlwind of legal necessities and corporate formalities. The news of the inheritance coup sent shockwaves through Boston's financial world. Headlines screamed of the scandal, painting Jacques as a fallen prince, and Clarice as either a conniving usurper or a brilliant avenging angel. She ignored it all. Her focus was singular, securing the legacy. Her first official day as chairwoman was met with a tense, palpable curiosity. As she walked through the marble lobby of Davenport & Sons, whispers followed her like a breeze. Employees who had once offered her a pitying, dismissive glance now averted their eyes or offered nervous, respectful nods. They saw the same quiet woman, but her stillness was no longer perceived as weakness. It was now seen as immense, unshakable strength. Instead of hiding in the 50th floor office, she called an all-hands meeting in the company's central atrium. She didn't stand on a stage, but on the floor among them, holding only a single microphone. The entire workforce gathered, their faces a mixture of skepticism, fear, and a desperate hope for stability. "My name is Clarice Davenport," she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous space. "I know that many of you are uncertain. You have read the papers, you have heard the rumors. I will not dwell on the actions that brought us to this moment, but I will not hide from them either. A great wrong was done not just to this family, but to this company, to all of you. For that I am profoundly sorry." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the gloating of a victor. Robert Davenport built this company on a foundation of integrity and a simple promise to build things that last. She continued, her voice resonating with genuine conviction. Somewhere along the way, that promise was forgotten. My sole mission is to restore it. This will not be a company driven by ego or personal greed. It will be a place where hard work is rewarded, where loyalty is valued, and where we conduct our business in a way that would make our founder proud. She looked out across the sea of faces. "I cannot do this alone. I am not Robert Montrose, but I learned from him and I share his values. I am asking for your trust, your talent, and your patience as we begin the work of rebuilding together." When she finished, there wasn't thunderous applause. There was something better, a slow rolling wave of heartfelt clapping that grew in strength and sincerity. Later that day, Peter Gable, the loyal CFO, whom she had immediately promoted to president, came to her office. His eyes were misty. "Robert would have been so damn proud of you today, Clarice," he said, his voice thick. "We have a lot of work to do, Peter," she replied, though a grateful smile touched her lips. "Yes, we do," he agreed. "But for the first time in years, it feels like the right work." Their first orders of business were decisive. She fully reimbursed the Davenport Family Foundation, adding a significant personal donation that tripled its endowment and installing a new independent board to shield it from any future corruption. The sycophants and yes-men Jacques had surrounded himself with were quietly and efficiently dismissed, offered generous severance packages to avoid any drama. She made it clear that competence and character were now the only currencies that mattered at Davenport & Sons. The legal fallout for Jacques was a distant, ugly storm she had to weather. She was required to give a formal deposition, a sterile, painful process, where she recounted the evidence in a cold, legalistic tone. She felt no satisfaction in it, only the grim finality of closing a chapter of her life that should have ended long ago. Faced with irrefutable proof, Jacques accepted a plea bargain, trading a longer trial for a 7-year sentence in federal prison. His assets were seized to pay staggering corporate fines. Genevieve, after her collapse, retreated to the Palm Beach house, refusing to see anyone a prisoner in a gilded cage, built of her own willful blindness. As for Brianna, she vanished from the scene, her testimony against Jacques buying her a clean exit. Clarice heard she had moved to Europe, a ghost of a life that was no longer hers to haunt. One crisp autumn afternoon, when the initial fires had been put out and a new steady rhythm had begun at the company, Clarice drove out to the cemetery. The gravestone was just as she'd requested, simple and elegant. Robert Montrose, he built things that lasted. She laid a bouquet of white lilies at its base, the scent of the flowers mingling with the earthy smell of fallen leaves. The cool breeze rustled the branches of the old oak trees above, and in the quiet solitude the immense weight of the last 3 months finally felt manageable. She didn't speak aloud, but she spoke to him in her heart, a silent conversation with the man who had seen her when no one else had. "I did it, Robert." She thought, her fingers tracing the cold carved letters of his name. "The company is safe. I promoted Peter just as we discussed. He's a good man. He's steering the ship with me." She told him about the foundation, about the renewed sense of purpose among the employees, about the small daily decisions she made trying to answer the question, what would Robert do? She confessed her fears, the moments of doubt when the responsibility felt too heavy to bear, and in the quiet rustle of the leaves, she almost felt his reassuring presence, a silent admonition to be patient, to be strong. "Your moment will come," he had told her. She finally understood he wasn't just talking about the will reading. He was talking about the rest of her life. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Peter. "The Westbridge board is requesting a meeting. They want to discuss a strategic partnership. They say they're under new management." A small, knowing smile touched Clarice's lips. The very company Jacques had conspired with was now coming to her hat in hand. The irony was as sharp as it was satisfying. She typed back a simple reply. "Tell them the new management at Davenport & Sons will consider it." She walked away from the grave, her steps light and confident on the damp earth. Jacques had believed his inheritance was the money, the power, the name, tangible assets to be squandered. He never understood. The true inheritance Robert had left her wasn't the billions in the bank or the skyscrapers that touched the clouds. It was the chance to build something better. It was a legacy of strength, integrity, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that true power isn't taken by force or deceit, but earned through character. And that was an inheritance Clarice would spend the rest of her life honoring. Clarice's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most observant, and that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest, but about having the patience to make your move when it matters most. She endured years of humiliation not as a victim, but as a strategist waiting for the moment to honor the trust placed in her and to claim the justice she deserved. Her victory wasn't just about inheriting an empire, it was about cleansing it of the greed and corruption that threatened to destroy it from within. It's a testament to the idea that character is the ultimate currency, and a legacy built on integrity will always outlast one built on lies. If you were moved by Clarissa's incredible story of resilience and vindication, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of the power of quiet strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of justice and unexpected twists. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening. The first thing she felt wasn't the pain from the surgery, but a profound, chilling silence. Isabella Rossi lay in a private suite at Cedars-Sinai, the kind of room that costs more per night than most people make in a month. The air, thick with the scent of antiseptic and expensive lilies, should have been filled with the comforting murmur of her husband's voice. But Damien wasn't there. The chair beside her bed was empty. Her hand, which had reached for his, found only cold, starched sheets. He had promised he'd be there when she woke up. And in that hollow silence, a terrifying thought began to bloom. What if the promise, like the man who made it, was a lie? Life with Damien Blackwood was a meticulously curated masterpiece, and Isabella Rossi was his most prized acquisition. Their Bel Air mansion was a symphony of glass and white marble with infinity pools that bled into the Los Angeles skyline and a garage that housed a fleet of silent, powerful cars. Damien, a titan of tech private equity, had built his empire from nothing, and he managed his life with the same ruthless precision he applied to his hostile takeovers. Every party was a calculated networking event, every vacation a photo opportunity for Forbes, and every moment of their marriage a testament to his success. Isabella had once been an art historian with a burgeoning career, her passion lying in the quiet dust of forgotten Renaissance studios. But Damien had found that quaint. "You won't need to work, my love," he'd whispered to her on their honeymoon in Santorini, his hand possessively on her back. "Your job is to be my beautiful wife, to be the grace in this world of brutes." And she, blinded by his charm and the sheer gravitational pull of his ambition, had believed him. She'd traded her dusty archives for walk-in closets the size of her old apartment, her academic pursuits for the art of hosting flawless dinner parties for Silicon Valley billionaires and Hollywood producers. Yet the gilded cage, for all its shimmering beauty, was still a cage. The staff reported to Damien. The credit cards sent alerts to his phone. Her friends were gradually replaced by a circle of women who were wives of Damien's associates, their conversations as glossy and superficial as the magazines they graced. He didn't yell or raise his voice. His control was far more insidious. It was in the subtle critique of her dress choice, the casual dismissal of an opinion she offered, the way he'd steer her away from an old friend at a gala with a grip on her elbow that was just a little too tight. "Isabella, darling, that dress is lovely, but the blue in the Armani brings out your eyes so much more. Don't you think?" he'd say, and the dress would be changed. "That's an interesting thought, sweetheart, but let's leave the financial talk to the experts." He'd chuckle and she'd fall silent. Her world had shrunk to the dimensions of his approval. The loneliness was a quiet ache, a constant companion in the echoing marble halls of their home. Her only true solace was in the small hidden studio she'd set up in a forgotten corner of the estate, where she would lose herself for hours in her own paintings, vibrant, emotional canvases that were the very antithesis of her sterile life. She never showed them to Damien. They were the only part of her that was still truly hers. The pain started as a dull throb in her side, a nuisance she ignored for weeks, attributing it to stress. But it sharpened into a blade, relentless and unforgiving. A series of discreet visits to the best doctors in Beverly Hills confirmed their fears, a large complex ovarian cyst that required immediate surgical removal. It was benign, they assured her, but the procedure was major. Damien, to his credit, was the picture of a concerned husband. He cleared his schedule, a feat Isabella knew was akin to parting the Red Sea. He personally consulted with Dr. Evans, the top surgeon in the state. He booked the most exclusive private suite at Cedars-Sinai, ensuring a level of privacy and luxury befitting the Blackwood name. "Nothing is too good for you, my darling," he'd said, stroking her hair as she lay pale and nervous in their king-sized bed the night before the surgery. "I'll be right there in the waiting room. I'll pace the floors. I'll bribe every nurse for updates. And the very second you open your eyes, I'll be the first thing you see. I promise." He held her, his embrace firm, protective. For a fleeting moment, the cracks in their facade seemed to seal over. She felt a surge of the love she'd first felt for this powerful, dynamic man. He was her husband, her protector. He would be there, he promised. The morning of the surgery was a blur of sterile efficiency. Nurses with kind, professional smiles prepped her. Damien stood by her gurney, dressed in an impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit, his hand holding hers. His phone buzzed incessantly, but he ignored it, his focus seemingly entirely on her. "Don't you worry about a thing," he whispered, kissing her forehead, just before they wheeled her away towards the operating theater. "I've handled everything. Just get some rest. I'll be here when you wake up." Those were the last words she heard from him. As the anesthetic began to snake its way through her veins, pulling her down into a dreamless dark, her last conscious thought was of his face, his promise echoing in the fading light. He would be there. Everything would be fine. The man who controlled every aspect of her life would surely not falter in this. The man she loved, or at least the man she had convinced herself she loved, would be waiting. The first sensation was a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from her abdomen. The second was the scratch of high thread count sheets against her skin. Isabella's eyelids fluttered open, heavy as lead shutters. The world swam into a blurry mosaic of muted beige and soft indirect lighting. She was in the recovery suite, the one Damien had insisted upon. A vase of white lilies, ostentatiously large, sat on a table in the corner, their cloying scent mingling with the clinical smell of the hospital. She turned her head, a slow, painful movement. "Damien!" She rasped, her throat raw from the intubation tube. The room was silent. The plush visitor's chair beside her bed, upholstered in a soft gray velvet, was empty. A flicker of confusion, not yet alarm, went through her. Maybe he'd stepped out to take a call. His work was relentless, she knew that. Or perhaps he was with Dr. Evans getting the post-op report. Yes, that must be it. He was a man of action, of details. He'd want to know everything before he saw her. She relaxed slightly, sinking back into the pillows and closing her eyes, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a lulling counterpoint to her pain. An hour passed. A nurse with a warm smile and a name tag that read Jessica came in to check her vitals. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Blackwood?" Jessica asked, her voice gentle as she adjusted the IV drip. "A bit sore," Isabella murmured. "Is my husband? Is he with the doctor?" Jessica's smile tightened for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of discomfort that Isabella in her drowsy state almost missed. "Dr. Evans will be by shortly to see you. Just try to rest for now." The answer was evasive, a smooth redirection. Another hour bled into the next. The anesthetic fog began to clear, replaced by a growing unease that was sharper than her surgical pain. Damien was never late. Punctuality was a religion to him. For him to not be here, for him to not have stormed this room the moment she was out of surgery, was not just unusual. It was unthinkable. She fumbled for the call button, her fingers weak. When Jessica returned, Isabella's voice was stronger, edged with anxiety. "Where is my husband? Has anyone heard from him? Please, I need to speak to him. Let me just check at the nurse's station for you, Mrs. Blackwood." Jessica said, her professional calm beginning to feel like a carefully constructed wall. She was gone for a long time, too long. Isabella's heart started to pound against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that made the monitor beep faster. She tried to sit up, but a searing pain shot through her abdomen and she fell back with a gasp, tears of frustration and pain welling in her eyes. She was trapped, powerless in this silent, luxurious room. Finally, Jessica returned, her face a mask of practiced neutrality. She was accompanied by a stern-looking hospital administrator in a charcoal suit. The administrator, a woman named Ms. Albright, was holding a tablet. Mrs. Blackwood. Ms. Albright began, her tone devoid of warmth. "My name is Patricia Albright. I'm the head of patient services." "Where is Damien?" Isabella demanded, cutting through the formalities. "Did something happen? Was there an accident?" Panic was a cold serpent coiling in her gut. That was the only explanation. He had to have been in an accident. Ms. Albright exchanged a look with Jessica. "Mr. Blackwood is not on the premises, Mrs. Blackwood. He settled the entirety of your hospital bill, a very generous prepayment, I might add, about an hour after your surgery began. And then he left." The words didn't compute. Left. Settled the bill. It was like trying to solve an equation where all the numbers were wrong. Left. Left to go. Where? Did he leave a message? A note. Ms. Albright cleared her throat, a dry rustling sound. "He left a message with his assistant, who then relayed it to us. The message was that he had urgent business to attend to and that you were in the hospital's capable hands." She paused, tapping her tablet. "He also signed your discharge papers in advance. Once Dr. Evans clears you, which should be in a day or two, you'll be free to go." Free to go. The phrase hung in the air, clinical and cruel. Isabella stared at the administrator, then at the nurse, searching their faces for some sign that this was a monstrous mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. She saw only pity in Jessica's eyes and a cool, bureaucratic detachment in Ms. Albright's. His assistant. Isabella's voice was a whisper. "He didn't even call himself." "That is the information we were given." Ms. Albright stated her patience, clearly wearing thin. "Now, if you'll excuse me, nurse, please let me know if Mrs. Blackwood needs anything else." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, leaving a wake of devastating silence. Isabella turned to Jessica, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. "He promised," she breathed, the words catching in her throat. "He promised he would be here when I woke up." Jessica's professional facade finally crumbled. She reached out and placed a comforting hand on Isabella's arm. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Blackwood." But the apology was just noise. Isabella's world had tilted on its axis. He had paid the bill. He had signed her discharge papers. He had left a message with an assistant. These weren't the actions of a concerned husband rushing off to an emergency. These were the calculated, sterile actions of a man closing a transaction. She was a line item on a balance sheet, a liability that had been dealt with and dismissed. She lay there, the physical pain in her body completely overshadowed by a tidal wave of emotional agony. He had left her. He had abandoned her in a hospital bed hours after major surgery, when she was at her most vulnerable. The promise whispered against her forehead in the soft light of their bedroom had been nothing but a puff of empty air. The man who had vowed to protect her had just delivered the most brutal wound of all, and he'd done it without leaving a single scar a surgeon could fix. The next 24 hours were a waking nightmare. Isabella drifted in and out of a fitful, painkiller-induced sleep, and each time she woke, the cold reality of her situation slammed into her with renewed force. The empty chair beside her bed became a monument to Damien's absence. She stared at it until her eyes burned, half expecting him to materialize with a charming smile and a plausible explanation that would make all of this a bad dream. But he never came. Her phone, which a nurse had retrieved from her personal belongings, was a dead brick on the bedside table. She'd tried calling Damien a dozen times. Each call went straight to voicemail, his smooth, recorded voice a mocking echo of the man she thought she knew. "You've reached Damien Blackwood. I'm unavailable. Leave a message." She didn't. What could she possibly say? She tried his personal assistant, a perpetually flustered young man named Jeffrey. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice strained. "Mrs. Blackwood, I hope the surgery went well." "Jeffrey, where is he?" Isabella's voice was thin but urgent. "The hospital said he left. There has to be a reason. Is it a family emergency? A crisis at the company? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, filled with the static of Jeffrey's discomfort. Mr. Blackwood left very specific instructions. Mrs. Blackwood, I am not to disclose his location. He said you would understand. Understand? Understand? What she cried, her voice cracking. Jeffrey, I just had surgery. I'm alone. I don't understand anything, he said. He said to tell you the arrangements have been made and that the house staff are at your disposal upon your discharge, Jeffrey stammered clearly, reading from a script. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Blackwood, I have a call coming in. I have to go. He hung up before she could say another word. Arrangements have been made. The house staff are at your disposal. It was the language one used to manage property, not to speak to one's wife. The coldness of it was breathtaking. Desperate, she called the one person she thought was a genuine friend in her curated social circle, a woman named Portia Van Doren. Portia was the wife of one of Damien's business partners, a woman whose life was a whirlwind of charity luncheons and couture fittings. Isabella Darling. Portia's voice was like tinkling champagne glasses. I heard about your surgery. How dreadful. Are you recovering well? You must be. Cedars has the best recovery suites. Did you get the one with the view of the Hollywood sign, Portia? I need your help, Isabella said, her throat tight. I can't find Damien. He left the hospital yesterday and I haven't heard from him since. Do you know where he is? A beat of silence. When Portia spoke again, her voice had lost its effervescence, replaced by a cautious, pitying tone. Oh, darling, you mean you haven't seen what it's all over page 6 online? And that dreadful gossip blog, the L.A. Ledger? I thought, well, I assumed you knew. Isabella's blood ran cold. With trembling fingers, she ended the call with Portia and opened her phone's web browser. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type. She found the L.A. Ledger's website. The headline, plastered next to a grainy but unmistakable paparazzi photo, felt like a physical blow. Damien Blackwood's new asset tech mogul dines at Spago with model Serafina Jade while wife is under the knife. The photo showed Damien at a candlelit table, leaning in close to a stunningly beautiful young woman with fiery red hair. He was smiling a genuine, unguarded smile Isabella hadn't seen directed at her in years. He was holding the woman's hand. The timestamp on the article was from the previous evening. While Isabella had been lying in a post-operative haze, terrified and alone, her husband had been on a date. The article was brutal, filled with salacious details from an inside source. It spoke of a month-long affair, of Damien's plans to rebrand his personal life, of Serafina being a more suitable partner for a man of his global stature. It even mentioned her surgery, callously framing it as the opportune moment for Damien to make his move. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. A wave of nausea more intense than any post-surgical discomfort washed over her. It wasn't just that he'd left her. He had orchestrated it. Her surgery, her most vulnerable moment, had been his exit strategy. She was a loose end he was tidying up before launching his new life. The final devastating blow came the next morning. Dr. Evans, a kind man with weary eyes, came to sign her official discharge. You're recovering well, Isabella, he said gently. Physically, at least. You're cleared to go home. Home. The word was a mockery. A few minutes later, Ms. Albright, the administrator, returned. Mrs. Blackwood, as you are now discharged, we do need you to vacate the suite within the next 2 hours to prepare it for the next patient, she said, her tone brisk. Your husband's assistant arranged for a car service. It's waiting for you downstairs. Isabella felt a surge of defiance. I'm not ready to leave. Ms. Albright's expression hardened. I'm afraid it's not a request. The room is booked. She then delivered the coup de grace. Also, there was a small matter with your personal credit card on file for incidentals. It was declined. As Mr. Blackwood only covered the procedural costs, we'll need you to settle the outstanding balance for She consulted her tablet. Mini-bar charges and premium channel access before you leave. It's a minor sum. $378.50. Declined. Her card had never been declined in her life. She tried to log into her banking app. Access denied. She tried the joint account she shared with Damien. Access denied. He hadn't just left her. He had cut her off. Completely. He had left her stranded post-surgery in a hospital that was now kicking her out with no access to money. The full, terrifying scope of his cruelty was laid bare. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had meticulously planned her destruction. He had left her with nothing but a waiting car to take her back to a house that no longer felt like a home, but the scene of a crime. She was a prisoner being released into a larger, more terrifying prison, a life where she had absolutely nothing. Isabella sat on the edge of the hospital bed, the crisp discharge papers feeling like a death sentence in her lap. The designer clothes a nurse had retrieved for her, a silk blouse and cashmere trousers chosen by Damien's stylist, felt like a costume for a role she no longer played. She was a millionaire's wife with less than $40 in her purse and a credit card that was now a useless piece of plastic. The car service Damien had so thoughtfully arranged was waiting downstairs, ready to transport her back to the marble mausoleum where she was supposed to quietly fade away. She was trapped, and the walls of the luxurious suite felt like they were closing in. It was in this moment of absolute despair that a soft knock echoed on her door. "Yes," she called out, her voice hoarse, expecting a nurse with a wheelchair. The door opened, but it wasn't a nurse. It was a man. He was tall and elegantly dressed in a charcoal gray suit that was tailored to perfection, but worn with a casual grace that Damien's rigid formality always lacked. He had kind, intelligent eyes, a strong jawline and dark hair with the faintest touch of silver at the temples. He looked familiar, but in a distant, dreamlike way. "Isabella Rossi," he asked, his voice, a calm, deep baritone that was instantly soothing. She flinched at the use of her maiden name. No one had called her that in a decade. "It's Blackwood now," she corrected him out of habit, then immediately regretted it. "Yes. I'm Isabella. My name is Nathaniel Sterling," he said, stepping fully into the room. He moved with a quiet confidence, an aura of power that was different from Damien's. Damien's power was a sledgehammer, loud and demanding attention. This man's was like a deep river, silent but immensely strong. "I know this is unexpected. We met once, a very long time ago, at a fundraiser for the university arts program. You were giving a speech on pre-Renaissance fresco techniques." The memory surfaced hazy and distant. It was over 10 years ago, before Damien, when she was still a passionate post-grad student with fire in her eyes. She remembered a handsome young man in the audience who had asked an incredibly insightful question afterward. They had spoken for almost an hour, a conversation that had felt electric. Nathaniel Sterling. He had been a young tech investor then, just starting his own firm. "I remember," she said, stunned. "You founded Sterling Innovations." "I did," he confirmed with a small smile. "And I remember you being the most brilliant and passionate person in the room. I was disappointed when I heard you'd given it all up." His words, a simple acknowledgement of the person she used to be, were like a balm on a raw wound. Tears pricked her eyes. "What are you doing here, Mr. Sterling? Please call me Nathaniel. And I'm here because I make it my business to know what my chief competitor is doing," he said, his expression turning serious. "And my chief competitor is Damien Blackwood." Isabella stared at him, confused. Damien had never mentioned Nathaniel Sterling as a competitor. He'd always dismissed Sterling Innovations as a minor player. "I read the gossip rags." Isabella. Nathaniel continued, his gaze direct and filled with an empathy she hadn't seen in years. "And I know Damien. I know how he operates. He doesn't just end things, he annihilates them. He liquidates assets, freezes accounts, and controls the narrative. I had a feeling you might be in a difficult position." It was an understatement of epic proportions. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it, she whispered, a dry, humorless laugh escaping her lips. I know. He gestured to the chair Damien should have been sitting in. May I? She nodded, and he sat down, leaning forward with an air of quiet intensity. Isabella, what I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear, but you need to know the truth. Your marriage wasn't just a relationship to Damien, it was a strategic merger. What are you talking about? Your father, Nathaniel, said gently. Professor Alistair Rossi. Before he passed away, he was a brilliant software engineer, not just an art history enthusiast. In his spare time, he was developing a revolutionary data compression algorithm. He was years ahead of his time. He never patented it properly. He was an academic, not a businessman. He kept all his research in personal journals. Isabella's mind reeled. She knew her father had dabbled in programming, but she had no idea it was anything serious. He had died suddenly of a heart attack when she was in college, leaving her heartbroken. After he died, Nathaniel continued, his voice low. Those journals went to you, his next of kin. A year later, you met Damien Blackwood at a charity event your father used to support. Do you think that was a coincidence? Damien knew about your father's work. He knew the potential of that algorithm. He didn't just marry you, Isabella. He acquired you. He acquired you to get his hands on your father's intellectual property. The room began to spin. Isabella thought back to their early courtship. Damien had been so interested in her father, asking questions about his life, his hobbies, his old office. He'd helped her sort through her father's things, boxing them up for storage. He'd been so helpful, so supportive. Now she saw it for what it was, a meticulously planned heist. The core technology that Blackwood Global was built on, Nathaniel stated, his words hitting her like stones, the very foundation of his $10 billion empire, was stolen from your father. The air left her lungs. Her entire marriage, the past decade of her life, was a lie. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a long, calculated con. She wasn't a wife. She was the key to a vault, and now that he had emptied it, he was discarding her. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice trembling. Because I respected your father. We corresponded a few times before he died. He was a genius. And because I despise what Damien Blackwood stands for. He builds his empire on the ruins of other people's lives. He did it to my company 5 years ago with a hostile takeover attempt, and he did it to you in the most personal way imaginable. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling city. Damien has left you here stranded and penniless because he believes you are powerless. He assumes you'll go quietly. He's arranged a car to take you back to a house where you'll be a well-cared-for prisoner until the divorce settlement, where he'll bully you into signing an ironclad NDA. He thinks he has won. Nathaniel turned back to face her, his eyes blazing with a fierce light. But he's made one mistake. He underestimated you, and he didn't account for me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim, elegant envelope. Your father's original algorithm is obsolete now, but the principles behind it are not. What Damien doesn't know is that your father was working on a second-generation version, something even more powerful. I believe the key to it is still in his research that Damien probably overlooked. If we can find it, we can not only build something new, but we can also prove he stole the original concept. He placed the envelope on the bedside table. This contains a passport in your name, your real name, and a plane ticket. My jet is waiting at the Santa Monica airport. It can take you far away from here, somewhere you can heal and decide what you want to do next. The car Damien sent is downstairs, but my car is also waiting at the service exit. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of compassion and challenge. You have a choice, Isabella. You can get in his car and go back to the gilded cage, or you can get in mine and start fighting back. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was a lifeline. For 10 years, Isabella had floated in the gilded, stagnant waters of Damien's world. Now she was drowning, and Nathaniel Sterling had just thrown her a life raft. To get in Damien's car was to accept her fate as a discarded object. To get in Nathaniel's was to reclaim the ghost of the woman she used to be. The service exit, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. A spark of the old fire, the fire Damien had so carefully extinguished, flickered back to life. A genuine smile touched Nathaniel's lips. Good. We don't have much time. Damien's security will be monitoring the main entrance. They'll report back the second his car leaves. He looked at her hospital gown. We need to get you dressed. The simple act of changing clothes became an act of rebellion. She peeled off the sterile hospital gown, a symbol of her vulnerability, and slowly, carefully pulled on the silk blouse and cashmere trousers. They were Damien's choices, but she would wear them as armor for her escape. Every movement sent a twinge of pain through her incision, but it was a good pain. It was a reminder that she had survived. While she dressed, Nathaniel was a model of quiet efficiency. He spoke softly into his phone, giving a series of coded instructions. The package is mobile. Egress point B. 5 minutes. He packed her few belongings, her phone, her wallet with its useless cards, a paperback novel into her designer handbag. My father's research, Isabella said, suddenly, her mind racing. It's in a storage unit in Pasadena. Damien put it all there years ago. He said it was to declutter the house. Of course. He'd hidden the evidence in plain sight. Don't worry about that, Nathaniel said, his focus absolute. I'll have a team retrieve it before he even realizes you're gone. The unit is in your maiden name, isn't it? Yes, she breathed, amazed at his foresight. I thought so. He'd want to keep it at arm's length legally. He glanced at the door. It's time. Nurse Jessica appeared at that moment, a wheelchair in tow. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Nathaniel, but a look of understanding and perhaps quiet approval dawned on her face. She had seen too many stories like Isabella's play out in these sterile rooms. Dr. Evans said you might need some help getting downstairs. Mrs. Blackwood, Jessica said, her tone professional, but her eyes conveying a different message. Thank you, Jessica, Isabella said, giving the nurse a grateful look. Nathaniel placed a steadying hand on her arm as she eased herself into the wheelchair. We're ready. Jessica pushed the wheelchair into the hallway. Instead of turning left toward the main public elevators, she turned right toward a stark metal door marked Staff Only. She swiped a keycard and the door clicked open, revealing a drab concrete service corridor. The service elevator is at the end of the hall. It goes directly down to the loading bay, Jessica whispered. Good luck. She squeezed Isabella's shoulder and then, with a final nod, turned and disappeared back into the main corridor. The journey down in the rattling freight elevator was tense. The air was cold and smelled of disinfectant. Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. This was real. She was escaping. For the first time in a decade, she was making a decision for herself, a terrifying, exhilarating leap into the unknown. The elevator doors opened onto a cavernous, dimly lit loading bay. A sleek black Audi A8, its engine humming silently, was parked near the exit ramp, indistinguishable from the other executive cars, yet positioned for a swift departure. The driver, a large man with a calm demeanor, got out and opened the back door as they approached. Nathaniel helped her from the wheelchair into the plush leather seat of the car. The motion sent a sharp pain through her side, and she winced, catching her breath. Easy, he said, his voice a low murmur as he slid in beside her. You're safe now. The driver closed the door, and the opulent interior of the car enveloped them, shutting out the grim reality of the loading dock. The car pulled away smoothly, ascending the ramp and merging into the bright Los Angeles sunlight. Isabella risked a glance back at the imposing glass facade of Cedars-Sinai. She had entered it as Mrs. Damien Blackwood, a prized possession. She was leaving as Isabella Rossi, a fugitive. They drove in silence for a few moments, navigating the city's traffic with practiced ease. Isabella's phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out. The screen read, Damien Blackwood. Her breath hitched. He was calling. After 2 days of silence, he was calling. Don't answer it, Nathaniel said, his eyes on the phone. Let it go to voicemail. He's probably just been alerted that his car service left the hospital. Without you in it, he's checking in expecting to hear your confused, compliant voice. She watched the screen, her thumb hovering over the decline button. It felt like the most important decision of her life. Answering meant being pulled back into his orbit, his web of lies and control. Ignoring it was a declaration of war. She let the call ring out, the vibration of the phone against her palm, a final desperate plea from a life she was leaving behind. A moment later, a notification popped up, a new voicemail. He's starting his damage control, Nathaniel surmised. First he'll try to sound concerned. Then when he can't reach you, he'll get angry. And then he'll get dangerous. The drive to the Santa Monica airport was a blur of palm trees and sun-drenched boulevards. The world outside the tinted windows seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding within. They bypassed the main terminal, driving through a private security gate that opened onto the tarmac itself. And there it was, a Gulfstream G650, sleek and white with a single discreet silver S on its tail. The jet's stairs were down waiting. As the Audi came to a stop at the foot of the stairs, Isabella felt a wave of dizziness. It was all happening so fast. The surgery, the abandonment, the shocking revelations, and now this. We're almost there, Nathaniel said, his hand briefly touching hers, a gesture of reassurance. As they stepped out of the car, the roar of another jet taking off nearby filled the air. A flight attendant in a chic, dark uniform greeted them at the top of the stairs with a warm smile. The interior of the jet was a study in understated luxury cream leather seats, polished dark wood, and soft ambient lighting. Isabella sank into one of the plush seats, the supple leather sighing around her. Through the oval window she watched the ground crew scurry below. A few minutes later the cabin door was sealed. The engine spooled up with a deep hum, and the plane began to taxi onto the runway. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Damien. Isabella, where are you? My driver said you weren't there. This isn't funny. Call me immediately. The tone was already shifting from feigned concern to irritation. She looked at the message, then at Nathaniel, who was watching her with a calm, steady gaze. Without a word, she held down the power button on her phone. The screen went black. She had severed the last link. The jet accelerated down the runway, a powerful, unstoppable force. As it lifted into the sky, banking gracefully over the Pacific Ocean, Isabella watched the sprawling cityscape of Los Angeles shrink below her until it was nothing more than a glittering, hazy memory. She was flying away from her gilded cage, away from the man who had tried to break her. She didn't know where she was going, not really, or what the future held. All she knew was that she was free. And for the first time in 10 years, she could finally breathe. Their destination was Lake Como, Italy. Nathaniel's private villa, Villa Serafina, a name that was a cruel cosmic irony Isabella chose to ignore, was a secluded paradise carved into the cliffs overlooking the water. It was a place of old stone, cascading bougainvillea, and a profound, healing quiet. The transition from the cold, sterile environment of the hospital to this haven of warmth and beauty was jarring, but in the best possible way. The first week was a blur of sleep-gentle walks through the terraced gardens and simple, delicious meals prepared by Nathaniel's discreet staff. He gave her space, never pressing, never crowding. He had set her up in a suite of rooms with a private balcony that offered a breathtaking view of the lake and the mist-shrouded Alps beyond. He provided her with clothes, simple, elegant pieces of linen and cashmere, and a secure laptop and phone. He was a perfect host, a considerate guardian, but there was a professional distance he maintained, and she was grateful for it. She needed to heal, not just physically from the surgery, but emotionally from the deep septic wound of Damien's betrayal. Her body mended faster than her spirit. The sharp pain of her incision faded to a dull ache, but the ache in her soul was constant. She would wake up from nightmares, her heart pounding, the image of Damien's smiling face in the paparazzi photo burned into her mind. During the day, she would find herself staring out at the tranquil lake, replaying a decade of her life, searching for the red flags she had so willingly ignored. The manipulation had been so subtle, so masterful that she felt like a fool for never having seen it. Nathaniel's team, as promised, had secured the contents of her father's storage unit. Crates of journals, notebooks, and old floppy disks arrived at the villa. One rainy afternoon, Isabella found the courage to open the first box. The scent of old paper and dust filled the air, a scent from her childhood. She ran her fingers over her father's familiar spidery handwriting, and for the first time since her ordeal began, she cried. She cried for the father she missed, for the brilliant mind that had been plundered, and for the naive young woman who had unwittingly handed over her legacy to a monster. Those journals became her salvation. She spent her days poring over them, rediscovering the man she had lost. Amidst his notes on art and history, she found the complex equations and flowcharts of his algorithm. With her own sharp analytical mind, a mind that had been dormant for 10 years, she began to understand the genius of his work. And just as Nathaniel had predicted, tucked away in a seemingly innocuous leather-bound diary, she found it notes on a Project Chimera, a second-generation algorithm that was exponentially more powerful and elegant than the one Damien had stolen. As she worked, a new sense of purpose began to replace her grief. This was her fight now. Not just for herself, but for her father's legacy. She wasn't just a victim. She was the custodian of his genius. Meanwhile, the war with Damien had begun. He had discovered her destination within 48 hours. His reach was long, his resources vast. But Nathaniel had anticipated this. The villa was secure, and a team of top-tier international security consultants ensured their privacy. Unable to reach her directly, Damien unleashed his fury through the press. A new wave of stories appeared painting Isabella as an unstable gold-digging wife who had suffered a mental breakdown after a routine surgery and fled with a known business rival. Anonymous sources close to Blackwood spoke of her erratic behavior and lavish spending. They twisted her love of art into an obsession, her quiet nature into reclusiveness. He was systematically assassinating her character, painting himself as the wronged, benevolent husband worried sick about his fragile wife. "He's trying to discredit you before you can discredit him," Nathaniel explained one evening as they sat on the terrace, a chessboard between them. The sky was streaked with purple and gold. "It's a classic preemptive strike. If he can convince the world you're crazy, nothing you say will have any credibility." "Will it work?" Isabella asked, her voice quiet. "People believe what they want to believe," he replied, moving his knight. "But truth has a way of cutting through the noise, especially when it's backed by evidence. Your father's journals are the truth." Checkmate. Their evenings often ended like this, with quiet conversation or a game of chess. She was beginning to see the man behind the rescuer. Nathaniel was brilliant, fiercely intelligent, but also possessed a deep well of kindness. He spoke of his own battles with Damien, of the predatory business practices and the lives that had been ruined. His fight was not just business. It was personal, ideological. He believed in building things, Damien in conquering them. A team of patent lawyers hired by Nathaniel began working with Isabella via encrypted video calls. They were cautiously optimistic. The journals, combined with a forensic analysis of Blackwood Global's source code, could build a powerful case for intellectual property theft. But the fight took a new, more sinister turn. One day, a formal-looking letter arrived via a Swiss courier. It was from Damien's legal team. It was a divorce settlement offer. An incredibly generous one. Tens of millions of dollars, properties, a lifetime annuity. It would set her up for life, allowing her to live in unimaginable luxury forever. But it came with one non-negotiable condition, a permanent, unbreakable non-disclosure agreement about Damien, his business, and their life together, and she would have to turn over all of her father's research materials. It was a bribe wrapped in a legal threat. He was trying to buy her silence. He was trying to buy her father's legacy, the very thing she was fighting to reclaim. "He knows," Isabella said, her hands trembling as she held the letter. "He knows that we have the journals. He's scared." "He is," Nathaniel agreed, his expression grim. "This is his way of testing your resolve. He still thinks he can buy you that you're the same woman he married, the one who would trade anything for a life of comfort. Isabella looked from the letter to the stack of her father's journals on the table. In that moment, the last vestiges of the timid, compliant wife Damien had created burned away. He wasn't offering her a future. He was offering her another cage, albeit a more comfortable one. She walked over to the fireplace, the legal document still in her hand. Without a moment's hesitation, she tossed it into the flames. They both watched as the thick, creamy paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. The words Damien Blackwood were the last to be consumed by the fire. "Tell the lawyers to file the lawsuit," she said, turning to face Nathaniel, her eyes clear and resolute. "I don't want his money. I want justice." The lawsuit landed like a bombshell. Rossi v. Blackwood Global became the headline that finally eclipsed the salacious gossip. The filing was a masterpiece of legal strategy, a precise and damning document that accused Damien Blackwood not only of intellectual property theft on a massive scale, but also detailed a decade of fraud and manipulation. It laid bare the truth of their marriage, reframing it as the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar crime. The world was stunned. The narrative Damien had so carefully crafted of the benevolent husband and his unstable wife was instantly shattered. Isabella was no longer a madwoman. She was a potential giant slayer. The case became the talk of Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and every major news outlet. Blackwood Global's stock, once considered untouchable, began to tremble. Damien's response was swift and vicious. He countersued for defamation, his lawyers releasing a flood of fabricated evidence, doctored emails, paid witnesses, who spoke of her instability, and even confidential psychiatric evaluations from years prior that Damien had coerced her into attending with a therapist on his payroll. He was trying to drown the truth in a sea of lies. But Isabella was no longer the fragile woman who had woken up alone in a hospital bed. The months in Lake Como, fortified by Nathaniel's quiet support and fueled by the rediscovery of her own intellect, had forged her into someone new. She had spent countless hours with the legal team, not as a passive client, but as an active partner. Her intimate knowledge of her father's work and her decade of observing Damien's methods made her their most valuable asset. She decided to take the fight one step further. Against the advice of her more cautious lawyers, she agreed to a single exclusive interview with Evelyn Reed, a renowned journalist known for her tough, incisive style. The interview took place not in a sterile studio, but in the library of the Lake Como villa, surrounded by her father's books and journals. Isabella, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, was the picture of composure and strength. She was not the hysterical woman Damien's PR machine had portrayed. She was articulate, intelligent, and unflinching. She didn't sling mud. She simply told the truth. She spoke of her love for her father, of her own abandoned ambitions, and of the slow, insidious nature of Damien's control. She walked Evelyn Reed through her father's notebooks, explaining the complex science with a clarity that made it accessible to everyone. She laid out the timeline of her marriage and the rise of Blackwood Global, connecting the dots with irrefutable precision. "Mr. Blackwood didn't just steal a company's technology," Isabella said, looking directly into the camera, her voice steady and clear. "He stole a man's legacy, and he did it by preying on his grieving daughter. He tried to erase my father, and then he tried to erase me. This lawsuit isn't about money. I want none of his money. This is about reclaiming a name, my father's, Alistair Rossi, and my own." The interview was a global phenomenon. It was watched by millions. Her quiet dignity and undeniable intelligence resonated far more than Damien's loud, aggressive denials. Public opinion, once swayed by his power, began to turn decisively in her favor. Support poured in from unexpected places. Former employees of Blackwood Global came forward with their own stories of Damien's unethical behavior. A retired professor who had known her father confirmed the nature of his research. The legal pressure mounted. The discovery process unearthed damning evidence. Forensics proved that the initial code for Damien's flagship product was a direct lift from files found on her father's old hard drives. The walls were closing in. The end for Damien came not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but in a quiet capitulation. Facing a shareholder revolt and a federal investigation prompted by the lawsuit's revelations, he was forced out as CEO of his own company. The board, desperate to save the corporation, settled with Isabella out of court. The settlement was historic. It wasn't about a payout. The core demands were public. Blackwood Global was forced to issue a formal public apology and officially credit Alistair Rossi as the foundational inventor of their core technology. They established a multi-million-dollar grant in his name for young innovators. And Damian Blackwood, under the terms of his severance, was bound by an NDA so restrictive he could never publicly speak of the case or Isabella again. He was silenced, erased from his own story. Months later, Isabella stood on the balcony of the villa in Lake Como. In her hand was not a legal document, but the charter for a new foundation she had created with Nathaniel's help, the Rossi Foundation, dedicated to funding the arts and sciences, the two passions of her father's life. Nathaniel came to stand beside her, handing her a glass of champagne. Their relationship had evolved slowly, naturally, from protector and protected to partners. He had never tried to save her, only to empower her to save herself. "To the Phoenix," he said, raising his glass. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a calm confidence. "I'm not a phoenix," she corrected him gently. "A phoenix is reborn from ashes. But I was never destroyed. I was just buried. And I finally dug my way out." She looked out at the shimmering lake, the future as vast and beautiful as the horizon. She had lost a decade of her life to a lie, but in fighting back she had found something far more valuable: herself. She had reclaimed her past, and in doing so, had built her own future, one that belonged to no one but her. The war was over, and Isabella Rossi had won. Isabella's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we trust the most. It's a journey from a gilded cage of silent despair to a triumphant flight into freedom. She was abandoned at her weakest moment, stripped of her identity and her resources, but she refused to be a victim. Instead, she unearthed the truth, reclaimed her father's legacy, and discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. Her victory wasn't just in a courtroom. It was in the moment she chose to fight, the moment she chose herself. What did you find most powerful about Isabella's transformation? Have you ever witnessed someone rise from the ashes of betrayal stronger than before? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and justice resonated with you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of overcoming the impossible. Your support helps us continue to share these incredible journeys.